I suggest, therefore, we wait perhaps just 1 minute until more people are joining. Okay, I can see the number of participants getting more stable. So let's start with the intro. So welcome again. My name is Roberto Forin. I'm working as acting director at the Mixed Migration Center. So I will quickly introduce the webinar, go through some housekeeping rules, the agenda, and then I will hand over to my colleague Chloe for the presentation, and then we will go into the panel discussion with our distinguished panelists. So first of all, I would like to thank the donors that supported the realization of this report, or more precisely supported the data collection that made this report possible. We are speaking about data collection that has been ongoing since 2019 globally. And so we are speaking quite a lot of different donors that we cannot mention entirely, but they will probably know who they are if they are in the room. And then, more importantly, we would like to thank the people who accepted to talking to us while on the move. We are speaking about 80,000 people on the move globally. And so you can understand that there's a really big thank you that we are sending out for the people that indeed took the time to talking to you. So as a way of introducing this event, I wanted to do very quickly 3 things. So first, say a few words about what is that we are presenting today, and that is in the report. The second, say why we think this is important. And then the third will be to say why we think is it important now specifically. So the report we are going to present, as I mentioned, is based on 80,000 plus 4MI survey. 4MI being our data collection initiative that we use to interview people on the move along migration route. And so we are presenting the data that we collected over the years, 80,000. We are also presenting 500 interviews that we collected with smugglers that inform also the finding of the report we're going to present today. As you can imagine, interview with smugglers is quite unique. And a note that is important to mention: when we say smuggler, what we mean is the people that interact with people on the move in the field. We define smugglers as anyone facilitating regular movement, not necessarily people that are taking migrants and refugees across border. So if you like, it's a more field perspective that we have on migrants smuggler. We are not speaking to the head of the organizations, obviously. So we use this data that we collected to look at various aspects that are central to the phenomenon of smuggling. We look at the role that smugglers play in decision making. We look at the role that smugglers play in protection, violation against people on the move. We look at the way smuggling net to operate, to what extent we are speaking about big international criminal network or not. We look at the role that corruption and collusion play in the smuggling business. And then we look at the impact that restrictive migration policies and enforcement have on the smuggling business. We actually do a bit more in the report when you have a time to open it, but we decided to focus on this specific aspect for this event today. And this is linked to the second part of what I wanted to say, why we think is important and why now. So tomorrow there is the second ministerial meeting of the Global Alliance to Counter Smuggling, which is organized by the EU Commission. And in that meeting, there will be obviously a discussion about strategy to counter smuggling. And it is important because a few weeks ago, there was also an announcement by the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, that the EU Commission will propose to triple the budget that is in the EU Commission budget for migration and border security from 25 million to 75 billion, euro. To give you a sense of the scale, currently the budget that is allocated for humanitarian aid entirely is 10 million. So if the budget for humanitarian aid remains the same, we are speaking about going forward a budget for anti-smuggling, border security, and migration management, which is going to be 7 times as high as the budget for development, for aid, humanitarian aid. And so I think that is an important conversation, the one that is going to take place tomorrow. And is a meeting at ministerial level. Civil society is not included in the meeting. And therefore, we felt that it was important to present our evidence today for the purpose of giving a chance to decision maker tomorrow to listen to what our data seems to be saying, and perhaps reflect and take it into account in the discussion. I think that that's in short what I wanted to mention. One small note, perhaps, which is important. We initially plan to include also a few slides today on a research we conducted on Bangladesh, migration toward Europe. But we decided finally not to do that, to be able to focus on the report we're launching today. Arezzo Malakuti, who is the author of that research and a migration expert, is not joining us, unfortunately. We will organize another event a bit later, specifically for this research, hopefully. So I think I'm done with my small intro. If you want to go to the next slide, we can quickly have a look at the agenda together. I'm introducing, so that's done. Then we have Chloe Sidney, who is a PhD and research lead at MMC, is going to present some of the key findings of the report. Then we have our panelists. I think I can introduce them now. We have Gabriela Sanchez, PhD and research fellow and migration expert from Georgetown University. We have Nathalie Vernès, head of migration sector, DG IMPA, West Africa unit. We have Matthijs Corzilius, policy officer at counter smuggling, DG Home. I've been practicing how to pronounce the name for quite some time. And then we have Matt Herbert, PhD also, and head of research at North Africa and Sahel GTOC Global Initiative to Counter Organized Crime. Housekeeping rule. So two things. We invite you to interact with each other via the chat box, but then use the specific, if possible, question and answer box to post any question for panelists or for MMC. What we will do, we will present, then have the conversation with panelists, and then we are planning to leave a generous half an hour for question and answer. So please put your question there. We'll make sure that we will answer to as many as possible of them. And then if someone would like to take the floor and ask questions live, you can also do that. If time allows, please raise your hand. I think that's basically it. Then I can give the floor to Chloe for the presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Roberto, and mostly thank you to everyone who's here today to find out more about how smuggling really works, which is obviously the title of the report, which I'm sure many of you have already become familiar with. But in any case, we will be presenting the findings today. So we're very excited to have you all here to be able to share more about the drivers, operations, and impacts of smuggling. Roberto touched upon this already, but human smuggling really is at the center of global migration debates and policy responses. But despite years of enforcement efforts and increasingly restrictive border controls, smuggling is still continuing to adapt, thrive, and expand. And this is partly because of the persistence of really simplistic narratives and myths, sometimes driven by lack of data, sometimes also driven by a political unwillingness to use the available evidence. And this is all really playing into smugglers' hands. So what we wanted to do with this report is really move beyond rhetoric and ideology and draw upon our unique data set to really look at how smuggling really works. So the question that we're asking ourselves today is this: we're really examining the drivers and motivations, operations and structures, and the impacts of outcomes of migrant smuggling. And what we're going to do throughout this presentation is engage with some of the key questions, key myths that are prevalent in the current discourse on smuggling, and respond to these questions with the use of our data. And in terms of data, I wanted to briefly touch upon the methodology that we're using. A methodology that gives us confidence to present these findings because it draws upon a huge volume of data collected over the years since 2019 using our flagship 4MI data collection program, through which we rely on a network of enumerators who are usually refugees and migrants themselves, based on over 20 countries around the world, conducting data collection continuously with people on the move worldwide. So you can see here on the screen, the full data set contains over 80,000 interviews with refugees and migrants. Of these, over 50,200 were actually smuggler users, so people who used smugglers as part of their migration. And our 4MI survey enables us to ask them additional questions on the use of smugglers. And then we also did an in-depth smuggling module with over 13,000 smuggler users, where we ask even more detailed questions about their experience with smugglers. So that's to say we have a very unique, large data set that we're able to draw upon for this research. And as Roberto mentioned, we were also able to interview over 450 smugglers, including women smugglers, which really gives us some unique perspectives on the challenges, the realities, the experiences of both people on the move and smugglers themselves. Of course, there are some limitations we need to mention. Because of the sampling that we use, combination of purposive and snowball sampling, the findings aren't representative of the full migrant population or of smugglers themselves. But given the volume of data collected, it does give us a lot of confidence to talk about broader trends and really present findings that until now we were only able to sort of guess at without pinpointing the exact data that supports our arguments. So as I mentioned, we're going to engage with some key questions and myths. The first one is that smuggling drives irregular migration. Does it? Well, there's a very simple answer to that question. Is no, it does not. Smuggling doesn't drive irregular migration. We asked refugees and migrants if anyone or anything influenced their decision to migrate. And in fact, only 6% of smuggler users say they were influenced by smugglers. You can see here a large portion of them, nearly half, actually made the decision to migrate themselves individually without any influence. And those who were influenced by external forces, as it were mostly influenced by other friends and family, either in another country or in the country of departure. So no, smuggling does not drive irregular migration. What does drive irregular migration, and we'll touch upon this a little bit later, is the lack of regular alternatives, which force people to turn to smugglers if they have the project of moving to another country. Now, another important question that really perpetuates narratives and myths which are potentially counterproductive in the current response is how smuggling networks operate and the role that corruption and collusion play within these networks. Now, as Roberto mentioned, we didn't engage with the big fish. We spoke to the people who are really on the ground, engaging with refugees and migrants themselves. So the people who are in contact with refugees and migrants, the people who have the real experiences of smuggling on a day-to-day basis. So this is what we're basing our findings on. Among those we spoke to, of course, almost all of them were working with other people, usually always the same ones, hence the trusted aspect of this network. And often with people in other countries. Of course, it's the nature of smuggling to be intercountry, and so we find that people indeed do engage with other smugglers, and often across borders. And we also found that beyond the people that they always work with, about 3/4 also cooperate with other smugglers or smuggling networks. And so here we start thinking about this big network, organized smugglers across borders, but in fact, it remains relatively small. You can see here about 79% of those cooperating with other smugglers or smuggling networks say that only up to 10 people were involved overall, which sort of puts our thoughts on these smuggling networks into a little bit of perspective. But the most important finding really in terms of these smuggling networks is not just their size, their flexibility, it's mostly the fact that their operations persist largely because of the corruption and collusion of officials who both enable and protect them. So we have findings from two angles here. We have the refugees and migrants themselves, who tell us that in many cases, state officials were involved in or facilitated migrant smuggling. So among the smuggler users, the people who use smugglers, 29% told us that this was the case during their journey. But we also have the smugglers themselves, 57% of whom tell us that they have had contact with state officials to facilitate migrant smuggling. A variety of different actors are involved. Most often it's police or border control, also often detention center staff. We have many quotes of migrants and refugees who tell us that they're actually freed from detention thanks to their smuggler who was able to interact with officials to get them released from detention. So this is something we've seen quite widely throughout the data collected. And this continues to play a very important role in smuggling operations despite avowed efforts to end smuggling. The corruption and collusion of state officials contributes, in fact, to enabling it. Now, moving on, another important question is the links between smuggling and risks along migration routes. It's a very common perception that smugglers are ruthless criminals that put the lives of the people they work with at risk. And it's a very tempting assumption to follow. I mean, I've read a lot of quotes by refugees and migrants, which do seem to indicate exactly that. But it requires more nuance. This is too simplistic a picture, and our data actually shows that we need to go beyond this assumption of smugglers as ruthless criminals to engage a little bit more with the reality of smuggling and the reality of the risks. Yes, it is true, smuggler users do face greater risks. We can see here, so among smuggler users, 37% told us they experienced physical violence, compared to 17% of those who did not use smugglers. And doing more in-depth statistical analysis, we were also able to find that smuggler users are in fact nearly twice as likely to experience any form of harm during their journey. So yes, absolutely, smuggler users are at greater harm. And you can see here the comparison on the screen between smugglers and non-smuggler users. In most, if not all cases, the smuggler users report having experienced these different risks more often than non-smuggler users. And yes, smugglers are indeed one of the possible perpetrators. So 21% of refugees and migrants identify smugglers as perpetrators, which means that indeed smugglers are often responsible for some of the risks and harms experienced by people on the move. But there are many other perpetrators who are cited, in fact, more often than smugglers. If you see here on the screen, you can see the criminal gangs feature much more prominently, as do also the military and police. So we had 28% of respondents identifying the military and police as perpetrators compared to 21% of smugglers. So it's important also to take into consideration the fact that there are multiple perpetrators involved, and smugglers are not the only source of risk for people on the move. And in fact, beyond the use of smugglers, the route itself is often also inherently risky. Refugees and migrants who are traveling along dangerous routes are actually 3 times more likely to hire smugglers. And it's in fact because they're facing dangerous routes that they do hire smugglers. It's the dangers they know that they're going to face in the absence of alternative ways of migrating that makes them hire smugglers in order to reach their destination. And so we find, in fact, that both the smugglers and the route expose people on the move to risk. So smuggler users are in fact doubly exposed because of the use of smugglers, but also because of the routes they're traveling along. And so given the dangers, smugglers can in fact also represent a form of protection for people on the move. We found that 19% of smuggler users were actually hiring smugglers to protect themselves from the dangers, both the dangers posed by the route, so for example, crossing the Darien, crossing the Sahara, but also protecting themselves from potential other perpetrators. So smugglers, in addition to being a potential source of risk, are also a potential source of protection for people on the move. And you can see here a couple of quotes from respondents who shared ways in which the smuggler was able to support them, in this particular instance on this slide, crossing the Darien from South America. Now, a last extremely important question that we need to engage with today, in particular in light of the meetings coming up tomorrow, is whether restrictive migration policies actually do break the business model of smugglers. And as you can imagine, well, not really, no. Without safe and legal alternatives, stricter border restrictions don't actually break the smuggling business. What they do, in fact, is counterproductive because they boost it. Based on the data that we've collected, we found that nearly half of smugglers had changed routes in the past 6 months, mostly because of changes in border security or police behaviour. So they're adapting. Yes, their routes that they may have been using previously have potentially been blocked by these restrictions, but instead of stopping altogether, they just redirect the routes elsewhere. And likewise, partly as a result of this, and as a result of the risks posed by increased government controls, more than half the smugglers had increased their fees in the past 6 months, meaning that people on the move are actually paying more to travel along potentially more dangerous routes to get to their destination. And you would have thought that perhaps targeting this supply and targeting the borders would reduce demand for migrant smuggling, but this is not the case. Among the smugglers we spoke to, 61% felt that demand for migrant smuggling had actually increased in the past year. And although this is in part because of the increase of people on the move, it is also, in many cases, due to the stricter border measures. And in fact, over a third of the smugglers who felt that demand had increased attributed this directly to these stricter border measures. People are unable to migrate because of these stricter border measures, and so they turn to smugglers, which is why we're able to say that in the absence of alternatives, the border restrictions are not necessarily breaking the smuggling business, but rather boosting it. And when we speak to people on the move, we ask them why they hired a smuggler, we see that generally they think it will make traveling easier, 44%, but also in many cases, 39%, that they saw no alternatives. There were no alternative regular pathways available for them to migrate. And so they turned to smugglers to achieve their project of migrating to another country. And there's a great quote here on the screen that features in our report as well, of course. If governments provided safe migration, people would go to safe places legally without having to take many risks. And I think this really encompasses a lot of what we want to say in this report. And I think it's very important to take into consideration when guiding discussions moving forwards. In terms of the takeaways of the report, but also of the presentation, and I do invite you to read the full report, because we don't have enough time to engage with all the findings presented in it here today, and there is a lot more to it than the slides I've shown here. But the key findings we wanted to engage with today for the purpose of this webinar, first of all, is that smugglers do not drive irregular migration. What drives irregular migration is the lack of legal pathways. Second, smugglers rely on small and trusted networks whose operations are enabled by corruption and collusion. Third, smuggler users are doubly exposed to harm, although the smugglers can also represent a source of protection. And finally, as we just saw, without safe and legal alternatives, stricter border restrictions do not break the smuggling business, they boost it. So what do we do about that? I do invite you to read the full recommendations in the report, but in a nutshell, we need to move beyond enforcement-only approaches. It's not enough to try to target the supply. And if we want to target demand, if we want to reduce demand, then that means creating real alternatives to irregular movement, whether that is modeling ourselves on the safe mobility offices that were briefly implemented in Latin America, whether that is facilitating asylum applications, whether it's increasing opportunities for safe labor migration. There are many different ways that we can create real alternatives to irregular movement, and that's one important component of reducing demand for irregular movement. And finally, we need to target the structural enablers of supply as well. We touched upon corruption and collusion, and that's one very important aspect of it. So really going beyond what we're doing currently, which is enforcement, border controls, and trying to prevent smugglers from operating, breaking the business model of smugglers, as is often said and repeated. We need to move more towards first reducing the demand by creating alternatives, but then also going beyond tackling the supply as it comes by targeting really its structural enablers. And that might also represent finding new forms of livelihood for smugglers who see no alternatives to the smuggling business as it stands, but may find opportunities elsewhere if opportunities could present themselves. And I think for the moment, I will leave it at that, because there are so many recommendations listed in the report, which we could engage with in more detail. But for now, I think it would be interesting to move on to the panel discussion, to give our panelists here the opportunity to express themselves and share their own experience and their own findings, their own reflections on the report. So I think I will stop waffling. We got to the final slide, and it's time for me to stop talking. But I do invite you to read the report, and as Roberto mentioned earlier, you can absolutely ask questions in the Q&A box or comment in the chat. And I'm really looking forward to now hearing what our panelists have to say to comment on and continue talking about this report. So I will leave it at that, and thank you all so much for your attention and for your interest.
Thanks, Chloe, for the presentation. I see a lot of hands on screen, so it seems that it was well received. I forgot to mention at the beginning that we were initially planning to present something from a research we conducted on Bangladeshi migration toward Europe. You might have seen that in the previous version of the agenda, the one that is offline. We decided not to focus on this report. Which was a good decision, because we are right on time now without the other presentation. We organize something specifically for that later. And then, of course, what I also forgot to mention during my short introduction, which I think is important to reaffirm now as we go into the panel conversation, is the overarching theme we are engaging with the report and the finding, and hopefully in the presentation today, is the issue of whether the current approach, the clear approach at least, to anti-smuggling, which according to the narrative that exists, seems to be mostly based on enforcement and policy restriction, is actually achieving the clear result of breaking the business model of smugglers. So to discuss this, but to discuss more generally speaking, what is in the report, if anything is particularly surprising, how the funding complement or challenge existing knowledge, and of course, what are the implications for anti-smuggling and migration policy more broadly. We have our panelists today. As I mentioned earlier, we have a combination of migration experts from academia, migration expert from other research center, GTOC, and then we have the pleasure and the honors to also have two representatives of DG IMPA and DG Home. That I would like to thank in advance for participating in the discussion, so that it doesn't remain a discussion between migration experts, but also include the perspective of policymakers, which is of course crucial for what we have been putting together and presenting, having an impact. So without further ado, I would probably start with you, Gabriela. If you can say something about the finding in general, and then how these relate to the research you've been conducting globally. You've been doing a lot of research on migration in the Americas, but also in Europe. So did you find anything surprising, anything new, anything that is contrary to the evidence you have been collecting? And then I'll ask all panelists to be short, 3 to 4 minutes max, so that we can perhaps do another small round amongst panelists before moving to the question and answer. Thank you.
Of course, thank you so much to MMC and to Roberto and to all of you for the invitation. I think I am very happy to hear, right, that the report combines and confirms a lot of the findings of this growing body of empirical research that researchers have been, and I would say maybe over the last 10 years, been putting together, right, that challenges many of these myths that you mentioned, you know, regarding migrant smuggling. And I think that at the very last part of your intervention, you also mentioned these other spaces that we're probably not looking at in terms of data collection. And this is the judicial space, you know, and counter smuggling. There's really no country, you know, to my that I'm aware of that keeps track, you know, with you know, very counted exceptions, that keeps track of the number of people who are apprehended and who ultimately are convicted for migrant smuggling. And I think in several regions of the world, what we see is that many of these decisions of who gets convicted are made within the courthouse, you know, in the courtrooms. And because we are very much oriented into this idea or this notion of transnational organized crime and criminal networks, we are not looking at the legal spaces, at the judicial spaces, where this information would also be very useful, you know, to see the effectiveness of counter-smuggling efforts. So I think that those will be my 2 points. Looking into this other spaces and other parts of the world where we have not necessarily been looking at, and also recognizing, as Chloe also mentioned, the diversity of the organizations. They are not solely networks, and many times, you know, they would not necessarily even account for the definition of organized crime. So looking into all these other definitions and variables, you know, would be really useful. But thank you so much for the time and for the opportunity.
Thank you, Gabriela, for kicking the discussion off. I'll not comment further, but go straight to Natalie. And I forgot to mention, we also have Paola Petrucco on screen for DG IMPA accompanying Natalie Vernes. So Natalie, floor is yours. Obviously, in your case, it would be interesting, you can start now and we can continue later, to hear your views on what we have presented so far, but perhaps we can also start already going into what you see being the implication for external cooperation, partnership, and development, broadly speaking, considering your line of work.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberto. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you. No, that was very, very interesting to hear the key findings of the reports and the main takeaways. And that's also very much aligned with what we're doing. I will clearly zoom in West Africa, because that's the area where we're working in DG IMPA. And so we have a number of initiatives that are really at the core of the issues that were mentioned in the report. So the reliance on smugglers along major routes in the region has become more prevalent to political developments in security concern and in socioeconomic and mobility migration dynamics in West Africa in recent years. These factors have weakened legal policy and operational frameworks, making it harder to protect vulnerable migrants. Smuggling thrives where people lack safe and sustainable alternatives. That was mentioned as well, for legal migration in particular, in these countries of origin and along the route, and where vulnerabilities go unaddressed. The report we're discussing today highlights the need for a broad approach to tackle these challenges, aligning with the EU's ongoing and upcoming external programming efforts. To address the issues comprehensively, the EU brings together different complementary initiatives that comprises tackling root causes, increasingly supporting legal migration opportunities, reinforcing migration management and protection of migrants and their rights along the route. I will give some examples what's ongoing in our region in West Africa, for example, and protection in particular. I can mention the program Migrate in Ivory Coast that deploys awareness-raising campaigns in different languages and together with local communities, protects disembarked people with humanitarian assistance and screening. That's COP Mauritania, and offers voluntary return to stranded and vulnerable migrants in transit countries. The focus is also on capacity building, financial support, and increasing the quality and quantity of care and assistance services and support, with the involvement of social and psychosocial actors to address the protection, assistance, social reinsertion needs of vulnerable migrants. I would like to insist a little bit more and give a concrete example of an holistic approach put in place in West African region by the EU with what we call the Migration and Jobs Package for Western Africa. It's a package of a bit more of 200 million euros that aims at intensifying efforts to enhance migration management and boost green socioeconomic development for youth. And we have a small component for technical assistance as well. So we have two main components of 100 million each, one for reintegration and counter-smuggling and trafficking, and one for socioeconomic development for youth, with a view to address the major drivers of instability and support the vulnerable population in West Africa. That package combines short-term activities to manage migration better, with migrants' rights at the center. That's the focus on counter-smuggling and reintegration I was mentioning, and then longer-term interventions to address the root causes of irregular migrations and accompany partner countries on future-oriented socioeconomic transitions. To create economic opportunities and address structural barriers, such as limited access to capital, precarity, and irregular incomes. This component focuses on sustainable job creation and skill development tailored to the needs of the private sector, enhancing access to finance and technical resources, and providing support to businesses and value chains. An emphasis is placed on addressing the specific needs of potential migrants and returnees. Also confirmed by the research paper on that's another piece of research that I would like to mention here. a research paper on the impact of the EU Emergency Trust Fund for Africa, produced in the framework of the Dynamic project. So I'm not sure everybody is aware of that, funded by Horizon Europe. One of the key takeaways there was that improve local conditions, services, and opportunities reduce migration aspirations over time. Alongside the initiatives put in place in the framework of the package, the EU actively supports West African countries in their broader responses to smuggling of migrants, strengthening existing capacities and enhancing efforts across prevention, protection, and prosecution. That's, I think I can be a bit more detailed later on, maybe during the discussion if necessary, in particular on this package, the new package for West Africa. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Natalie, for this quite impressive list of initiatives that are ongoing in the area of root causes, root causes, but also partly in the area of creating legal pathways. I think we're going to get back to this a bit later, because it's quite an important part of the conversation we want to have. So thank you for now, and then I'll move to who I have on my list to Matthijs, perhaps to complement. I think with a specific perspective from DG Home, after having here Natalie from DG IMPA, and then we'll move to Matt to close and the first round. So Matthijs.
Thank you very much, Alberto, and thank you very much, Chloe, for the presentation of the report. Also, from my side, thank you very much for the work that you're doing. Very shortly, I'm Matthijs Kozilius. I work as a policy officer and the Director General for Migration and Home Affairs of the European Commission, so DG Home in short. And I thought that, well, first acknowledging the important work that you're doing. I think doing interviews with more than 80,000 persons over a period of 6 years is really impressive. And while also acknowledging the growing body of empirical research, I think we see still a lack of solid evidence of how migrant smuggling dynamics operate across various irregular migratory routes, where the differences between routes can be quite big. And I think it's a common challenge for us also to really understand what is going on and make sure that our policy is really tailored to address it in a comprehensive and good way. I thought maybe in my short intervention, I'll focus on what's happening tomorrow and let's say the next steps in the EU policy to counter migrant smuggling. As you said, it's very timely, the presentation of the report, as tomorrow is the second international conference of the Global Alliance to Counter Migrant Smuggling. The first one was a little over 2 years ago, and it's a conference hosted by the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, with the participation of many ministers, many partner countries, and also international organizations. So we have many representatives from the UN family there tomorrow. And what we will discuss are the three, I'd say, strands of action, if you can call them like that, of the Global Alliance to Migrant Smuggling, which I think or hopefully exemplify the comprehensive approach that we're taking, and where I see, in my understanding, quite a large alignment with the recommendations that you're making and the actions that should be supported. So we have a strand on preventing migrant smuggling, which acknowledges the need that countries need to have adequate national legal frameworks, action plans that are based on the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime, and more in particular, the UN Protocol against the smuggling of migrants by land, sea, and air, to also enhance border management actions, and to conduct information and awareness raising campaigns that make people, migrants on the move or prospective migrants, aware of the risks of irregular migration and what are accessible legal alternatives for them. Then a second strand of action is the response to migrant smuggling. Here, again, we clearly acknowledge the need to improve data collection, sharing of situational awareness among partners along routes. In this framework, maybe I would like to use the occasion to also say that we are developing together with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime a new action that will aim to address improving the knowledge base on migrant smuggling, having also route-based approaches, and eventually also culminating in a new global report on the smuggling of migrants in a couple of years' time. And we hope that the important research work that you are doing, that others in this call are doing, can feed into that work with UNODC. Another action in this trend is to support law enforcement and judicial cooperation. There's quite a lot of support programs ongoing with partners outside of the EU that help raise the capacity of law enforcement and judicial authorities to also support international cooperation. And here I would like to highlight that the focus is really to target the organizers of criminal networks, or as in EU jargon, it's sometimes referred to as high-value targets, and look in particular at the online dimension of the crime and also the illicit financial flows that are linked to it. And also very important throughout all our actions is the protection of the rights of migrants and refugees, especially those in vulnerable situations. The third strand of action is, I think, I hear the call very strongly from your research that the lack of legal alternatives is actually why people turn to smugglers. And it's not smugglers that are, let's say, or at least in a very small percentage of the cases, are the ones that are convincing people to engage in a smuggling trajectory. But the alternatives to irregular migration, the actions that we are supporting, are focused on providing or promoting more legal pathways to the EU. Of course, this is joint work of EU institutions, but also EU member states. And we have tools in place that we hope will advance this. So the recent agreement at political level of the EU on the talent pool, the EU talent pool, which we will function as a matchmaking tool for employers in the EU, for job seekers outside of the EU. We hope that will be contributing to this effort. Also, the development of talent partnerships, so mutually beneficial partnerships that we have with a few countries in North of Africa, with a few countries in Asia, that we hope will also provide more opportunities, perhaps circular migration schemes, and we're supporting those with EU funding as well. And as Natalie also referred to, addressing the root causes of irregular migration. So also addressing those reasons why people decide to go on an irregular migration trajectory. Of course, sometimes this is conflict. Sometimes it's also simply the pursuit of a better life elsewhere. And by supporting, let's say, local economic development, we hope that this perceived need or this need to leave might also be addressed. And as part of the comprehensive approach to migration, this also includes the return of smuggled migrants from the EU when they have no right to stay in the European Union. So I think this is about my 3 minutes. So I would like to conclude just saying that we have EU support for all these actions that I just mentioned. I know sometimes in the media, EU support for border management actions feature prominently, but we really have EU support across, let's say, this comprehensive approach, applying a whole-of-root approach here. Tomorrow at the conference, a joint declaration will be presented to be endorsed by the partner countries and international organizations, which also outlines these areas of work, and where you will also see, say, for example, also addressing corruption will also be explicitly mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthijs, again for quite informative intervention listing the pillars of the current approach, which it will be good to go back a bit later, also based on the questions that start coming from the audience. And before giving the floor to Matt, I have to say something because I see question, and the report is currently not available on our website. Apologies for that. We have a bit of a technical glitch. And we are also making some last minute changes to the report. So please hold on and be patient. The moment we're going to put it back online. So Matt, the floor is yours now to perhaps start reflecting on what you hear so far, if you wish so, or presenting also your specific views on what we presented. To critically engage, we always say that critical engagement is the most interesting way to go about this panel discussion, so feel free.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Roberto, and thank you to Chloe for the development of such a fantastic report. I think it's very interesting, and I think, echoing Gabriela, it really adds a lot to both the academic field as well as to the policy field on this particular issue. So I'm going to do a little bit of A and a little bit of B to what Roberto said. I'm going to both critically reflect on some of the things that have been brought up to date, but also insert a little bit of a different twist on some issues that I think we could perhaps tease out for a second report if Roberto and Chloe are up to doing it in a couple of years. So building off what Matthias just said, and I think it's actually an excellent way to kind of begin to frame what we should be thinking about as we read this report and as we look at the outcomes of the conference to be held tomorrow. That's market adaptation. So Roberto asked, can we break the business model of organized crime? I think, or of human smuggling. I think Chloe very wisely answered no, or at least not by taking on smugglers alone. That's a much broader issue. What I'd say is that actually talking about breaking the business model elides a key fact, and that's that human smugglers and other types of organized crime actors that are involved in the human smuggling ecosystem across a number of different geographies are highly adaptive and highly resilient entities. And so really what we're talking about is looking at how different interventions will shape that ecosystem, will drive that adaptation, whether it be for the better or for the worse, whether heightened harms will occur, violence towards migrants, as Chloe flagged in her interventions and whatnot. Now, I think we're already starting to see some adaptations. I think that comes out very clearly in the report. In reading through it, I was struck by the discussion around shifting prices. 57% of smugglers said that their prices had gone up over the course of the last year. And I think that that's broadly in line with what we at the Global Initiative have seen across a number of different geographies in Latin America, in North Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa, and in Asia, which is that prices are going up. Inflation is an issue worldwide, and we see it in the human smuggling sphere itself. So right now, what we're looking at oftentimes are costs, even for simple maritime crossings, that range into the thousands of euros. So 3,000 to 5,000 euros to cross the central Mediterranean, for example. If you're looking at some of the more complex journeys to Latin America, say you're going from South Asia, such as Bangladesh or India, into Central America and up to the US or into other areas of North America and down into the US, you're oftentimes paying in the tens of thousands to nearly $100,000 to be able to do so. Now, in part, that's being influenced precisely by government action. So as borders harden, prices go up, and there's an elasticity in price point that migrants will pay. But it's also important to underscore that this is being driven also by heightened imagination on the part of migrants and smugglers supporting them on where they can go to. We're not talking about really short hop journeys anymore, movement from one place right across the border into the other. Those still occur quite frequently, but now we're also speaking of transcontinental journeys. So movement, like I said, from South Asia over to Latin America, or from South Asia into North Africa with onward movement into Europe. Now, this also brings up another point of adaptation that I think is interesting in the report, and that's the role of social media. It's notably low in terms of what smugglers are saying. So they say that their social media advertisements draw in about 26% of respondents. What strikes me is that's actually notably high. That's a very large number given traditional reliance on family networks and other options for spreading information. What I'd also say is that when we look at how social media is being engaged with in the migrant interviews that are featured in the report, there's a very mixed picture that comes out of it. So these references to WhatsApp groups where migrants are engaging and exchanging information back and forth, I think is very interesting. And it underscores that we shouldn't just be thinking about social media and smugglers in terms of pure advertisement, but also the diffusion of information much more readily between networks of loosely linked people that are able to provide information on how to do outreach to smugglers, to other actors that previously would have struggled to engage. That brings me to the third point on adaptation, and that's corruption. So 57% of smugglers said that corruption was central to their operations. They engaged in corruption. I think that broadly tracks with what a lot of research in the field has underscored, which is that corruption is a key way that that smugglers and migrants are crossing borders, are crossing internal checkpoints. What I'd also say is that as smuggling becomes more high value and more transcontinental, the reliance on corruption is likely to increase. So as borders become hardened, as it becomes more difficult to move, as the prices that migrants are willing to pay to smugglers to move goes up, the bribes that can be offered to security force officials and the level at which bribery can occur is also going up. And this needs to be something taken into account as we look at how it is we structure anti-corruption campaigns. It's no longer enough to focus anti-corruption campaigns on low-level security force officials or border policemen alone. There needs to be much more of a holistic approach taken. To come to a point where I slightly disagree with the report, though, and this is the critical reflection element, is the point on smugglers being only small entities and only small actors, that it being 10 people alone that comprise a typical chain. I think that is the case in some geographies. So across North Africa, for example, or the Central Sahara, we do see that there can be relatively small groups that are involved in the transportation of migrants. So if you think of a paseo going from Agadez up to Gatroun or Gatroun up to the North African coast, you can actually have a small number of smugglers that are involved. I think when you start talking about transcontinental trips, though, the number of actors involved becomes much higher. You start having a much more expanded ecosystem that's central to the smuggling process. But critically, and this is where I agree with Chloe on this, you don't have enormous criminal networks that are controlling everything. Rather, you have loosely organized small groups that are linked together by organizers back in a home country or in a destination country that are able to operate together. And I think this sort of link approach is critical to look at and understand, because again, it increases the resilience of a lot of the human smuggling ecosystems that we see out there, and makes it so that there's replaceability if law enforcement action targets one cog or one sector in that link. Oftentimes, it will not kind of limit movement entirely across that route itself. I guess final point is just on communities. And I was struck in the report by the reference to 20% of communities linked to smuggling look at it as a critically important livelihood. That's a very important thing to take into account, because that also starts to underscore some of the risks if human smuggling and other forms of illicit economic activities, such as commodity smuggling and whatnot, that predominated in many borderland communities, are just fully taken away if law enforcement approaches alone are used to address the phenomenon. The risk is that this kicks out an economic tool that's being used to support communities and can heighten unrest in these areas and cause substantial stability challenges if we're not careful. So I think we need to be very careful as we define the art of the possible and how we pair together different interventions, as Matthias alluded to in the approaches to be taken tomorrow, different interventions that conjointly come in to stabilize situations more broadly and offer opportunity to migrants that are seeking to simply better their lives, rather than contributing to instability in areas that are already suffering from serious challenges with fragility. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I took note of some of the point of view you make, because I think we can use them to respond and use it to revamp the conversation. But before that, I would allow panelists to get back to each other if needed, particularly to Gabriela. I think she has been the only good scholar that actually keep her 3 minutes. So out of fairness, I think it's fair to let you start, but it's actually good so that you can perhaps reflect on some of the intervention of other panelists. And then just to say that we have a lot of questions coming, and so we will be probably quite quickly open the floor. But before that, Gabriele, and then if anyone else want to quickly respond to anything was said by someone else, please do so, but just keep it short so that we leave the half an hour I promise for question and answer. Gabriela.
Of course, thank you so much, and thank you all for your comments. And I was also looking at some of the questions, and I think I agree with some of the observations. It's great that we have these spaces and that we're coming together with data, and that there's so much interest on the part of researchers, to advance this work. But I think that we really need to start looking into what we are missing. A lot of the information that we have is information that we already know, and I think that that we need to, and in many cases, also think beyond, as Chloe mentioned, beyond the specific myths and silos. I really like how Matt mentioned, we look at different, if we look at the organization and the structure of the facilitation of human mobility in general, first of all, we will see that this is different, and regarding depending on what part of the world and what corridor we're talking about. Also, something that we need to keep in mind: facilitation is not the same thing as migrant smuggling. So I think that many times we just think that if somebody is assisting another migrant to reach a specific destination, that counts as a smuggling, when that is not the case. And I think that is another one of the myths that we often, or the ideas that we, that many of the times as researchers, we just keep reproducing. And I think we need to be very, very careful with that. I would also, I saw that a lot of the questions are very much limited, or are very specific to this economic landscapes, and also and very restricted to notions of supply and demand. And I'm excited, I'm encouraged to see that level of interest. I think that also models that are only looking at the business model, or that are only based on supply and demand, are not necessarily looking at some of the more regional dynamics. I'll take advantage here of what some of the questions were related to what we're seeing in the context of the Americas. Definitely the most recent decisions to suspend some of the mechanisms that allow for people to arrive legally to the northern part of the continent have had other kinds of impacts, in South America and Central America, and in Mexico, and the kinds of dynamics that we're seeing. The fact that people are not arriving to destinations that once were seeing as the goal doesn't mean that people are not moving, nor that means that smuggling operations, the ones that actually facilitate the entry into a different country for a fee, they are still taking place. Some of the data that I have access to actually reflects a reduction in the costs, and this is very much related to the fact that there's not that many people seeking to reach a destination, or not the same people or the same nationalities that were looking until a few months ago, until about almost a year ago, to reach the northern part of the continent. I will leave it at that, so that there's other observations, but thank you so much for the space once again.
Okay, so I will have a couple of points to mention in response to what I heard so far before opening. But as I said, if any panelists want to quickly respond to anything was said by others, Okay, so I will just mention a couple of things. So on the role of social media and on let's say the communication between smugglers and refugees and migrants, one point that I think is important to mention is that while we have seen that they don't play a very significant role when it comes to the decision of migrating regularly, then they play quite a prominent role in providing information to refugees and migrants while they're on the move about many aspects of the journey, including through use of social media, which become much higher. And there, of course, there is a risk that some of the information that is provided is misleading, is not accurate, is problematic. On the other hand, since it seems that very often we have this very complex picture where everything is true and the opposite of this is also true, people we interview also report that they see smuggler as a protective measure, including when they're on the move, possibly to protect them from other perpetrators of violence, which, as Chloe said, are cited amongst more important perpetrators. The nature of the network, the Matt, as I said, and also linked to what Gabriela mentioned, we interview facilitator of irregular migration if we have to define what we did according to the UNDC convention, not only smugglers. And so, of course, this has influenced the data we collected. The point we're trying to make, which I think is the overarching point I wanted to make before opening, is that we think that this notion that we are not dealing with only international criminal network is very much linked to what we think we can offer to the conversation, which is very much to debunk certain myths that are very central to the narrative that exists. And this also goes back to what Nathalie and Matthijs mentioned. It is as if there are a number of initiatives that exist as we speak in the area of addressing the drivers of migration, which means addressing the demand, in the area of creating, at least to a certain extent, some legal pathways, in informing migrants, but they don't seem to be very central to the narrative we hear. We shall see tomorrow what come out of the conference, but what we hear very central in any discussion that is there, particularly on anti-smuggling, is that we had to smash the gang, we have to break the business model of smugglers, smugglers luring people into regular journey, smugglers are the almost only perpetrators of violence. Then, of course, if you read some of the documents that come out, the issue of tackling collusion and corruption are mentioned, but they don't seem to be playing a very central role in the narrative, and the narrative is having consequences. Because, as I said, there is a proposal to increase border security and border management to 75 million, and when we look into how this budget is allocated, I think it's fair to say that the vast majority goes into the restriction part of the package and not enough, we think, in the other components that are there, but they are deprioritized. And they are deprioritized because of this sort of prevailing narrative that the only way to put things back under control is to fight the smugglers. Having said that, there are quite a few questions, so perhaps we can move to that. We have started answering some online. So just, there are a few questions about regional differences, whether smuggling partners are different, whether difference in corruption. Of course there are. And then in the report, we touch upon some of those. Obviously there are, just to make an example, we know, for instance, that smuggling is not so prevalent within West Africa. And there, if you like, the particularly important finding is that there is actually smuggling existing within a free movement area, such ECOWAS country, and is low, but there is, and the fact there is some is very interesting. There are difference in the role that smugglers play in regard to the issue of violation of the human rights of refugees and migrants. We know, for instance, that smugglers that operate between East Africa and the Gulf come very, very high when it comes to violation that occur against refugees and migrants there. We know, for instance, that in Latin America, in the movement between South America toward North America, or toward the north part of South America, rather, because we don't interview, we don't do interview in the US. There, the report of violation committed by smugglers is very low. So yes, it is very much context specific. We have included something in the report about this, I think, in a specific box. So have a look. There is an issue on the criminalization of humanitarian worker. I don't know if my colleagues have already answered in writing, but for as important as this issue is something that we don't touch upon in the report. So we are not going to engage with that, but we are digging out a report that or a paper that DRC along with other have produced, and that we can share with the audience in the chat. So I think that there is a question on legal pathways that I cannot find anymore. Yeah, to what extent legal pathways program target the same category we find among undocumented migrants? I was wondering if perhaps someone in the audience want to take that one. In the audience, among the panelists, sorry, I mean.
Roberto, yeah, I can come in. If I understood well, the question is if let's say the legal pathways that the EU supports actually targets the same persons that are considering engaging in an irregular migration trajectory. Well, on that, I think the approach we have in the talent partnerships is it's not just to support an individual mobility for a particular, let's say, skills, with a particular skills background, or for an individual vacancy, but to have, let's say, a broader partnership with a partner country that also includes training, upskilling, to kind of increase the group of persons that could benefit from such a partnership. I am aware that there's not, let's say, a one-on-one match currently for EU needs of the labor market with those persons that may consider an irregular migration trajectory, or at least to the extent that we have knowledge on it. Also, that I think we can do further research on. This would be very interesting, and I think also would very much help us in developing these talent partnerships more. The talent partnerships that we are supporting at the moment are relatively recent, so they have been launched in recent years. Their scope and types of activities are being discussed with the partner countries. So I think it's fair to say that today that we are not there yet, but we're trying to put the right measures in place to increase the availability of legal pathways through these partnerships in the coming years.
Thank you, Matthijs. Any reaction to this? Any comment from other panelists? Okay, then I'm going again to the question I see in the question answer. A question for DG Home again, Matthijs, you are a bit under the spotlight. I'm surprised it is so, I have to say. So is there any positive movement toward a replication of the EU-Turkey statement to other countries? Is it considered possible given some of these countries are plagued with corruption and HR abuses? So would you like to comment on that?
Well, thanks, Alberto. First of all, I very much welcome also, as we said earlier in the panel, a critical exchange. No, I appreciate any question I get, and also I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. For me, it's a bit difficult to say for if an EU-Turkey statement or EU-Turkey statement like arrangement is being prepared. That, to my knowledge, no, it is not. The Commission is not. I understood if I understood the undertone of the question right, it's maybe a bit more widely meaning to refer to should you as an EU cooperate with partners outside the EU where maybe the respect for human rights is not always guaranteed. If I may give my let's say assessment of that, I think, well, first of all, and Natalie knows better than I do, I think we have a human rights-based approach for all the EU-supported interventions. So when it comes to EU funding, when we prepare interventions, when we implement them, when we have independent monitoring of them, to monitor that, let's say, the engagement of the EU is fully in line with the human rights obligations and in support of them, in fact. And then the engagement with EU countries along the routes also comes down to an assessment, if you ask me, that if you acknowledge there's an imperfect situation, okay, maybe you could also say that in certain instances of the EU itself, should you engage or should you not? And our attention in engagement is always to improve things for the better. So to see where we can support measures that are in line with international commitments, with EU commitments, and legal frameworks. So in that sense, we are supporting engagement with various countries that one may say, let's say, are not perfect, if I can put it like that. But of course, always within the guidelines and let's say the green lights given to us by the member states of the European Union in the Foreign Affairs Council, if and how we can engage with certain parts of the world, and then we would support that.
Thank you, Matthijs, and sorry if we put you on the spot. I would just want to add something, but I see Natalie, perhaps you want to add something to this?
Yes, no, indeed, just as was mentioned by Matthijs, just to reinforce a little bit that indeed we have a human rights-based approach, mandatory for all actions funded under NDK Global Europe. So our funds align with the contractor human rights obligation when support is targeting reducing irregular migrations. Migrants and refugees' rights are at the center. We also have a lot of monitoring mechanisms and tools such as initial assessments, regular partner reports, verification missions, result-oriented monitoring, and external evaluations, just to mention some of them. And this has been recently reinforced in 2025. In our contracts as well, we have clearer human rights provisions. We have this human rights-based approach internal guidance. We also have a clear now new procedure to be used in case of suspicions of allegations of violations of human rights. So we have a set of measures and possibilities to tackle that issue more prominently, let's say.
Thanks. I would like just to add something, perhaps based on also on our research, a bit beyond this report that we presented today, but linked to the recommendation that you will find in the report. In the recommendation, we argue that partnership is essential, including with transit country and country of origin. Of course, what we argue is that at the center should be conditionality for human rights, which was mentioned now by colleagues from Home and IMPA, but should, as much as possible, also include legal pathways that people could possibly access while on the move. And there is a model that has been experimented by the previous US administration, the Biden administration, which was called the Safe Mobility Offices, which was an attempt at least to put in place at least a number of those measures by offering access to legal pathways for people on the move of certain nationality in certain countries while still on the move. We feel that that has the potential to at least have a dent into this business model of smuggler by providing a credible alternative. And perhaps going back to the question, which kind of legal pathways, I think that it's very important to have clearly in mind that we are speaking about many different kind of legal pathways. So there is first and foremost, obviously, legal pathways for people fleeing conflict and persecution, which, as Chloe mentioned in the question answer, seems to be actually the one that are more likely to use as smugglers, probably because they are running away from threat that prevent them from staying where they are. But we are also speaking about other legal pathways, speaking about family reunification, which I think we can all relate to how important that is, that someone which is separated from her or his family can reconnect. And we are speaking about, of course, labor migration. We know that one of the very strong driver, actually for both those that are fleeing conflict persecution and those that are not, is better livelihood opportunities. Is something that come up very strongly from our research. And so it's very important. And we know sort of that there is a strong, we try not to use the push and pull factor language, but it is a big pull factor, the fact that people know that when they will be coming to Europe or the US, they're very likely to be able to find a work here regularly. So there we are speaking about ways to allow that to happen regularly without contributing to the business model of smugglers. We are going to add in the link, in the chat, a couple of links to the study that I mentioned on the safe mobility offices. Is anyone willing to also contribute? We can also go back to the question I asked at the very beginning, what you see, what you think that still does not come out clearly enough from the report, and then that will give me the chance to have a look at the questions that are there and decide what to ask to whom in the 5 minutes remaining.
Well, if I may, Roberto, I would like to make one remark that is not really answering your question, but I hope it's a nice remark, and that in the meantime you can look in the chat so that I give you a little bit of time. Now, what I would like to say is that, of course, often in our communication about irregular migration, we talk about numbers, so many thousand irregular border crossings detected along this route and then that route. So now that the Western Mediterranean route towards the EU is bigger than the Atlantic route. My personal appreciation for your report is the use of quotes. It really makes, let's say, the interviewees persons, individuals, which they are, of course, but we normally have a tendency of talking about numbers rather than about individuals and about people, and that these are people with families and communities where they come from. And I think this really gives it a personal touch in the report, and I think is also very important.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, as I said earlier, we have been speaking to 80,000 people over the years. So that for us is very important. We also bring responsibility to make the best possible use of the time that people have taken to answering to us. And indeed, sometimes the quote are a very important part of this data collection that is mostly quantitative. Now, I have a question to panelists. I even think that I know from whom this question is coming from. How realistic it is for government to adopt a policy of creating legal pathways in the current political climate, when it is entirely uncertain what the scale of demand could be for legal movement, especially in light of the impact of climate change and the general trend of electorate voting for those parties restricting pathways. Anyone want to take this? Perhaps not Mattis, who we continue to ask to respond, or Natalie, perhaps Gabriela, Matt, anything on this? Also coming
Sure,
from...
I can try to jump in a little bit on this. I mean, I think we should come from a position of deep skepticism that at a global level we're going to see massive shifts in political interest in and adoption of legal pathways on the level that will, manifestly kind of stop the level of irregular migration we see now. That it'll fully divert into that. That said, I do think that there are glimmers of change out there. I think what we're seeing in Spain, for example, underscores that different opportunities are emerging, oftentimes as countervailing political interests start to come to the fore, especially around demographic changes, the issues of economics. It's important also to flag that within the Spanish model, Spain is not kind of opening up legal pathways equally globally. There's a pronounced interest in some areas and a lack of interest in others. But that said, I do think that it provides potentially a vision of where we might be headed. And it might be that the politics around migration, the politics around legal pathways start to shift rapidly as either demographic issues start to come to the fore in advanced economies within Europe or within North America, or as potentially associated economic difficulties also start to manifest, where the politics start to focus much more on how it is that broad-based economic growth can be achieved, rather than questions as to what degree migrants are drawing on the economic systems. So I think there's a possibility, but I'm not holding my breath that it's going to shift very rapidly at a global level, or that we'll see an easy evolution towards that end stage. I think if anything, it's going to be very messy, and the politics are going to be very contentious for quite some time.
And if I may add, I will echo Matt's remarks in the sense that I'm also very skeptical about the equal access to legal pathways, because I think that we're going to see, or what we are very likely to see, is the increase on very specific forms of legal pathways that are not going to be accessible to everyone. And even the ones that are accessible, I think that, and this will also be kind of an observation in terms of the gender and gendered dynamics, of what we see in smuggling. And there was a UNODC publication that came out a few years ago that showed that how women were more likely to be charged with smuggling when they were facilitating the transit of their family members, which reveals all of these gaps, in terms of how smuggling is articulated. We also have, in recent months, the Kinsa case, that also points us at issues of care and how women are have a specific risk of being criminalized for smuggling, for providing care for their loved ones. So I think that thinking beyond a specific just the legal pathways and looking more into how they are likely to impact different people will be important, something that we should be looking at in the months and years to come. Thank you. Roberto, we can't hear you.
Sorry, apologies. I was saying that is already past 1 minute past the hour. I see that people are leaving because we are still mid-afternoon, depending where you join. So I'll be tempted to close it here. And I will, of course, not try to recap what has been said, but I think that it's fair to say that we've done our best to make our voice heard, and hence the voices of people that have been speaking to us through this discussion. A big thank you to all panelists coming and presenting. I hope that some of you will be able to support us in bringing that on the table of decision maker as much as possible. Thanks for the people that ask questions. Sorry if we haven't managed to answer all your questions. You can send more to us directly. We'll put an email in the link, and then please send, and then we can answer separately. Thank you to Chloe for your presentation. I think you are typing, so answering in writing, so you haven't had a chance to join the conversation, but thank you. And then more to come. We shall see what is coming out tomorrow out of the Global Alliance, and then we can also continue the conversation online on social media. But thank you for now.
I echo that. Thank you so much, Roberto, and thank you so much to everyone for contributing, for having so many questions and comments. Sorry we weren't able to answer everything. As you could see, I was typing furiously and failing to respond to everybody. Just one point as we end is, as was mentioned previously, really the fact that the quotes were highlighted so prominently in the report is, I think, really one of the important takeaways. You know, it's more than just numbers. Yes, we present data based on 80,000 interviews, but it's really the voices of the people who spoke to us that need to come through as much as possible in this report. So I hope this is the case, and I hope you're able to learn from the quotes and learn from the experiences of people on the move and what they've shared with us. So thank you all so much for being here.